What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 503. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, did you make it home okay?
Well, kind of. I did manage to mess up my ankle in Barcelona, but, past that, I did make it home. I did survive the trip, though it wasn't the most successful Magic outing I've ever had.
Were you playing soccer? Like with the ankle?
But
I assume you kicked somebody? What happened?
I had a lot of free time, and me and Pat Cox had stayed an extra day because, TBS, Ben Sek, who's actually been on the show, he lives there now. And he's got a 3-month-old Ezra, so it was really cool getting to see, mini TBS there. TBS also top 8 of the GP there, which was really cool. So
super awesome. Congrats, TBS. Yeah, he's part of our LR extended family, and that is super cool. Yeah. And he we spent a lot of time walking around the city, and I think I must have just strained it at some point. Yeah. Repeat injury or repetitive motion type deal. Well, I'm glad you're back home safe and sound. You said the PT didn't go well for you, but
no, I went 4-8, unfortunately.
Right. So not up to your standards, but the weekend before, we haven't had a chance to chat about this yet. You won the GP. You won GP Denver. I had what was I doing? I was doing something that required my attention, but I was getting updates from you. And at some point you were like top 8 LOL. And I'm like, come on, really? And then I think I saw somewhere that you had made it to the semis, and then there was just nothing for like an hour and a half. And I'm like, what's going on? I finally went on Twitter and I'm just like, come on, he won. And then people started messaging me, Luis won the GP. That's pretty sick, man.
Yeah, it was really funny because, you were in Barcelona at that point, right?
Yeah, that's what it was, right? I was already there. Yeah.
Because so were most of the rest of the Denver folks. So we have our Denver group chat, right? Matt Nass and Sam Pardee and BK and all that. And so half of us, me, Josh, and Gabby were here all playing in the GP. And then those other guys were all in Barcelona.
Oh, yeah.
And they went to bed with me saying, yeah, I'm dead for top 8 because I was 9-3. Mm-hmm. And then they woke up and I just won the GP.
So you kind of got a 2-for-1 there. Well, congratulations, man. Man, it is incredible the level of play that you've been able to sustain for the past, I don't know, your career, but, specifically since you came back from your coverage stint has been just remarkable. Yeah,
the combination of doing coverage and being on a podcast really does, provide a lot of barriers to being, really, good at technical magic. I don't know, dude.
You've been winning a lot and you've been on the podcast. Well, maybe we could cut one of those out, but
it is funny because I've actually been having a pretty good year. And then when I, won the GP, people were like, wow, you're back. And I'm like, did I go somewhere? I thought I was having a good year.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just the downside of having already had such a successful career. Honestly, people just assume that the best is behind you, but really you've had one of your marquee year and a halves, since you've been playing.
No, this has been good. Yeah. And I'm hoping to close out strong, at the last Pro Tour. More on that later. Yeah. But let's jump in because we got a pretty cool topic here today.
Yes, we do. Okay. So first things first, got to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Now, besides being the place to go, right, for everything that you need magic related on the internet, they also have kind of another wing or another, I don't know how to put it, but Channel Fireball Events, CFBevents.com, by the way, is a place you can go to check out all of the things that are going on with CFB events. Primarily, though, the big hitter, the number one thing on the entire year is GP Vegas. And you can go to gpvegas.com to get details on it. Now, here's the deal. You know us, we don't recommend stuff willy-nilly. We don't just throw around, random whatever. We're very much look, if we think something's awesome, then we're going to tell you about it. And if we don't, then you're not going to hear about it from us. And GP Vegas is going to be amazing. Every single GP Vegas has been absolutely incredible thus far, and they only seem to be getting bigger and bigger. The best comparison I can come up with is a major gaming convention, but just centered on Magic only. Think Gen Con or PAX or something like that, but like a Magic version of that.
GP Vegas is the flagship Magic event of the year. It is the one event I would say you can't miss. It's just basically, if you enjoy any aspect of Magic, you can find it there. You can find there's multiple Grand Prix main events, so you can play the hyper competitive Grand Prix. You can play MCQs. You can play old drafts of any format you want. There's a commander party and a commander zone, so like you have the option to play that way. There's also just tons of people there trading. There's tons of dealers to buy and sell cards. There's tons of artists. Like, this is like, if you've ever been to a Grand Prix but haven't been to Vegas, Vegas is like 5x that Grand Prix. Like, yes. I'm not even kidding. Like really Vegas is. A couple years ago had 10,000 people playing in the main event. Yeah. That's 5x a big Grand Prix.
It's just kind of insane when you think of it like that.
And things are split more now because there's multiple Grand Prix and the side events are a lot. There's a lot more side events, but you're gonna see 10,000 people in this building, and so I can't recommend more any one event if this is the sort of like if you're into basically any aspect of Magic. I mean, we're going to be there. We're going to be providing coverage. I'm actually going to be there, the whole time and probably playing in some stuff as well. Like there's just so much to do, so much to see. And then, Vegas isn't everyone's cup of tea, but Vegas has a lot of awesome food. If you're into gambling, which I may be deeply, then that part's fun too.
Oh, you're deep. All right.
Yeah. So there's not many events I would hype this much. Like, you don't hear us talking about every random Grand Prix. Mm-hmm. It's because Vegas is just that sweet. And, Vegas is in 3 weeks or so from
August 22nd through 25th at the Las Vegas Convention Center. And of course, Luis, by the way, shame on us. It's Magic Fest Las Vegas. Like we're way off brand here.
But you have enough time to get there and plan it out. Vegas is good at holding lots of people. So definitely recommend it. And it's going to be a blast. If you see us there, say hi. I really hope Sheila's there with those cookies again.
Oh yeah, you mean biscuits? Don't let her hear you call them cookies.
She'll
get
probably
you.
Listening. Yeah, damn, I just cost us some biscuits.
You might have, yeah, but yeah, really, seriously, that is it. Really is the best place. And like Luis said, we're going to be doing coverage there. CFB events and CFB are putting on coverage. Luis and I will be there in person, and we hope to see you there. So please check that out. I'll put a link in the notes as well for the. So you can see the Magic Fest information sheet just sort of in general. And then there's one specifically for MTG Vegas. It's cfbevents.com/MTG Vegas if you want to check it out. The Patreon. That's the other thing that keeps this show going. Patreon.com/limited resources. Now, I always mention that, you can get some cool benefits by being a patron. And one of them at the very top end of the scale is actually what's going to happen here on this show. So we'll do an M20 Crack-A-Pack in just a second, just to kind of, loosen up a little bit here. But our main topic is actually provided by a patron. So I'll talk more about that in just a minute. First, Crack-A-Pack. Have you been playing any M20, Luis? I haven't been playing it. Yeah,
I've actually been jamming. I never do quite enough to hit top 1,000 Mythic or to just get Mythic and Limited, but I usually just play M20 arena drafts when I don't have something specific I need to do, which isn't like vast amounts of time, but I did one actually today, and I did one actually in Barcelona. Me and Pat were going to Starbucks, and I was like, I should have brought my laptop to grind arena. He's like, that'd be ridiculous. We're in Barcelona. There's so much we could do here. And we get there, and guess who we see grinding arena? None other than Benjamin Stark.
In his natural environment.
So
a Starbucks on the grind.
Twice
okay.
At random this Starbucks wasn't random. It was right next to the site, but once was not next to the site. A random Starbucks, we walk in and Reed's there. So
yeah, what are you going to do, man? Magic players going to play.
Yep.
But what was I going to say? One other thing we forgot to mention, by the way, and this is part of the reason why I haven't been playing as much M20 myself, is because MTG Vegas, the GPs there are Modern for the constructed one. There's 2 GPs, by the way, that happen there. And then the other one is Modern Horizons.
Yeah.
And I was practicing Modern Horizons for covering of the Mythic Championship. So that was kind of why it had my focus. But anyway, back to M20. First card out is Ripscale Predator. That's the 4 red, 6/5 Menace. No. Disenchant, no. Anticipate, no. Plummet, no. Soul Salvage. Where are you at on Soul Salvage? We both liked it quite a bit. I do see it coming around a little later than I anticipated.
Yeah, I always want to have one in my black decks and often 2. but it's not a card I want to take first pick, certainly.
Okay, so let's not take that. Silverback Shaman.
I hear you drinking there, and during when we were talking about the sponsors, I was thinking LR is basically powered by three things. Channel Fireball, the Patreon, and Arnold Palmer's.
Yeah, it's true. I guess we could add coffee on my desk to that right mix now. For you. Oh, hey, there you go. Fueled by Arnold Palmer's. Silverback Shaman's our next card. 3 GG, 5/4 Trampler. When it dies, draw a card.
I'm a little more down on this than I was at the beginning of the format. This card is good. I don't have a problem playing it. In fact, I do almost always play it. But green is so dominated by the elemental theme that I often want elementals more than I want Silverback Shaman. So yeah, it's a good card. I'm not unhappy to play it, but it's just not quite as good as I thought. Though it is our pick right now, I believe.
It is indeed. Yeah. It also suffers from the 5-drop problem, right? Where it's just, even if it's the better version, you can find something similar. Gorgine Vulture. This is the 2 and a black 2/2 flyer. It mills you for 4, and you gain 1 life for each creature that you milled.
Yeah, I like this card. Not as much as the Silverback, but I like it. I like it more than Soul Salvage early because I feel like between Barter for Blood, or Blood for Bones rather, and Soul Salvage, there's multiple of those effects. They're a little more replaceable. Mm-hmm.
Right. And the Vulture's a little more in demand. Then Tectonic Rift, no. Winged Words. Here's your strictly better divination.
I think this is worse than the Silverback, though I think it's close. I wouldn't fault you, I guess, for taking it. Mainly I just don't think the Blue-White Flyers deck is that good.
Yeah. It doesn't have quite as much of a home as you'd think, especially with so many cards saying, creatures you control with flying, or if you control a creature with flying. Next is it's the same exact card. It's just in reverse. It's Mind Rot.
Yeah, I have not liked Mind Rot that much. This format is not as good.
I wonder if there's any big sealed tournaments for M20. M20 really did kind of fall through the cracks as far as some of the bigger stuff went. Specifically the Mythic Championship and this big GP both got kind of sniped by Modern Horizons.
It's in a weird spot. I've talked to a number of people who are like, yeah, M20 kind of lands, or where it lands doesn't give me a good opportunity to play it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. Even though I have played
I just played a lot because it's on Arena. So.
Yeah, that's actually why I have to. All right, uncommons. Fry, 1 and a red instant, can't be countered. Does 5 damage to a planeswalker that's white or blue, or a creature or planeswalker that's white or blue.
Yeah, I like this card. I don't love first picking the sideboard cards, though I do like taking them fairly aggressively in a best of 3 world, of course, not in best of 1.
Well, I've got another one for you. Noxious Grasp, 1 and a black, instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker that's green or white. You gain a life. I've actually main decked this a few times now, and it's right on that edge. I actually don't know which side it falls on. But when I was short a little bit, I was like, all right, I'll put a Noxious Grasp in. I mean, it does hit something a decent percentage of the time, something like 40 or whatever.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're playing against green-white.
I don't think it's unreasonable. Scuttlemutt helps it a little bit. Also, if you have ways to discard or get a lot of card advantage, it's worth floating this. But I think...
But I still like Winged Words or Silverback Shaman over at Pack 1 Pick 1. And man, here's the card that we just cannot seem to get away from, Luis. It's Diamond Knight again. How many? We had 3 of these in our draft walkthrough. It's the 3 mana 1/1 Vigilance. You choose a color when it ETBs, and then whenever you cast a spell, the chosen color gets a counter. Still just been underwhelmed by it. Very, very, very slow. It feels like there's a window for your opponent to kill it if they think that it's going to be an issue. For example, if both players are at 20 life and nobody has really any good attacks, and you're like, play this Diamond Knight, go, and you have 4 cards in your hand. You name a color, they're thinking, okay, it'll probably be a 4/4 or 5/5 at some point down the line. I'll just shock it, or use some cheap removal on it right now. And then if not, it's like mediocre top deck and a very slow 3-drop. There's just kind of not enough here for me to really be excited about it, even though I do have it in the realm of playable.
I think it's playable. I do think you can bias your deck towards where you have 2/3 of one color and then it's okay.
And then it's a little better.
It's kind of cool in this mono red deck that Cuneo's been advocating. Andrew Cuneo has been just saying you should just force mono red, because all the cheap goblins work well together and go super late, and then you want 2 or 3 Diamond Knights if you can get them.
I see. Oh, I mean, that would be much, much, much better.
Yeah,
right? If it's getting a counter effectively every turn.
Tweeted out a version of a deck he was actually asking Cuneo if it was good a little bit ago.
Was it mono red as well?
Yeah, yeah. He drafted a mono red deck and asked Cuneo, like, is this good?
Okay. All right. Well, maybe it's a thing. We'll keep it. Is that arena only?
Yes, because it takes advantage of the fact that the arena bots are not, they don't take these.
Because Cuneo, remember was it Dominar? Whatever, he first picked Fire Elemental, I think.
Yes, I remember him doing that.
3 sets ago or something. And he just... Yeah, it wasn't this. It was like 3 sets ago, and he was just jamming mono red every single time. He was streaming it. I watch the stream sometimes when I'm up early enough. Our land is Tranquil Cove. That's the blue-white gain land. And then our rare is Bishop of Wings. This is the white human. It's a 1/4. Whenever an angel enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. Whenever an angel you control dies, you get a 1/1 spirit.
I do like the Bishop. I don't like white very much in this format. So I think that...
So is the angel, is it just the 3/2?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that kind of our primary payoff here?
Yeah.
So we gain 8 when it ETBs?
Yeah, I just don't want to take a double white card first pick. I mean,
I don't either.
As little as I'm interested in doing so, I think I would take the silverback here.
I would too. By the way, that's really off brand for you, and you're going to have a lot of very disappointed fans out there.
Well,
passing a divination,
yeah.
Huh?
And unfortunately, I don't have access to the soundboard, or the silverback would really be going nuts right now.
I'm just glad you decided to stick with the monkey, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned it just briefly, but one of the tiers in our Patreon is actually the highest one, allows you to work with us on your own show topic. So basically, if you're at that tier for a little while, then, we'll reach out and start to work on what you want for an ideal show topic. And it's something that we kind of work out together. And this one is actually one that I worked on with Kayla, and she's a big supporter of the show and a longtime listener, and she's a friend of mine as well. And she's been a fantastic supporter of the show. And the topic that she wanted to cover, kind of broadly speaking, what was talking about what our favorite draft formats were ever and why, right? Kind of going in depth on that. And, I had some chats with her to work out kind of an extended topic. And this is what we came up with. Basically, we're going to do kind of 2 things. We're going to give you our current, as of today, summer 2019, top 5 best draft formats, or at least our favorite draft formats of all time. And while we do it, we're going to kind of keep track of the bullet points that made these formats what they were. So the things that we really liked about them that stood out, and maybe the things that it had, and even some of the things that it notably didn't have. And then we're going to combine those things to come up with what, at least from our perspective, would be the ultimate draft format. What are the attributes that ultimate draft format has, and what are the ones that it doesn't? So let's get into the top 5s first. And I think let's just go back and forth, Luis, with ours, and we'll give a brief reason, why we liked the set and a little bit about what was going on with it. So I'll start. My number 1 all time is triple Innistrad.
Yeah.
This is not Shadows over Innistrad. This is, 2010 Innistrad.
Yeah.
And, this is often cited as one of the best. This is probably the format, it's probably like in the top 5 number of times I've drafted it formats for whatever reason as well. And this Innistrad seems to have hit this really, really excellent balance of everything. It just has a little bit of everything, and it's wrapped up in a package that, really importantly, by the way, this is a big deal for me, is I don't know when I'm drafting, even after I've got like 3 picks deep. There's a lot of directions that you could go at all points, and it never really felt like the draft portion got boring at any point. I was over 100 drafts into that format, and no question, I couldn't wait to do the next one still. And that's just something that you almost never see, being able to draft that much. And I have a huge appetite for draft. Like I can draft even a mediocre format a lot. But Innistrad just kept my full attention going really deep. Some of the other things that stood out about it, it's a generally slower format. Not super, super slow, right? There's been examples of slowers, and there were some decks that could put some pressure on you. But generally speaking, it was a mid to slower format. Great diversity of archetypes. What one particular strength of Innistrad was its great build around cards. It really had some sweet uncommons that would allow you to build around, and even some rares that would do it. Why don't you pick up with this too, Luis? Because spoiler alert, that's also your number one.
Yeah, I have Innistrad as number one. I think it just holds up and really well. And one of the things that you didn't mention that actually you didn't have on the list originally that I think is pretty important as to why I like this format is that it also has really good handholds and like level 1 strategies. So
that's a great point. Yeah.
So what I mean is like
if
you haven't drafted much and you've never drafted Innistrad, or you just haven't drafted much in general, and you open your packs of Innistrad and you get the rundown that like, hey, like humans are good or vampires are good, you can actually just draft those decks.
Yep.
Like you can draft the decks that look like they're there and are good are actually pretty good. And I actually I value that a lot, because maybe like for us that doesn't really matter once we've drafted a million times, but I think that's important for the overall health of the format and for the total enjoyment, where it's not like you have Rise on the list, which we'll talk about later, which I don't have anymore. And part of it is like Rise is super punishing to people who don't know what's going on.
That's true. And you're totally right. What should we call this range of?
I just said good.
You're totally right.
I just said good handholds, level 1 strategies worked.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that Innistrad encapsulates a newer, a Magic player that sits down and says, what is this travel preparations card? Should I take it? Yeah, go for it. Do that thing. But it also encapsulates me and you doing return my card from exile so that I can shuffle cards back into my library and replay my flashback cards, right? Like that is the widest range probably of any of these sets.
Yeah. And I think that range is important.
That's great.
Because you want, like, one of the things that game designers strive for is hidden depth, because you don't want, like, look, you've seen these board games, right? Or like, miniatures games like, Warhammer 40K or whatever, where it's just
I've seen those at the local game store.
It's so clear to you that it would take you 20 hours to like build your army and like 50 hours to like learn how to play and learn all the rules and learn the game, right? Like massively complicated. And that's great for the people who want to do that. A lot of the most enduring games are relatively simple to like learn the basic mechanics of and then have a ton of depth under that. Like chess, for example.
I see.
It's not that hard to learn what the pieces do in chess. There's just not that many different things they do. Well, the strategy, on the other hand, is pretty deep.
Right.
And that becomes clear very quickly. So I think that draft formats that have good build-arounds and harder things to do and like little level 1 and like little like tricks and synergies and stuff, all that stuff is awesome. I think that it's also good to have really surface level stuff that actually does work out. Like one of the advances that we've had in recent drafts over the last, or formats over the last 3-4 years, is the cycle of 10 uncommon color pair gold cards.
Right, that becomes a real staple.
And those are just awesome. And the reason they keep doing them is because they're so perfect. It's like, hey, I don't really know what this format's about, but I opened a black-white card that says like draft a bunch of cheap creatures and tokens. Cool. And ideally, those cards aren't traps, right? Like, I opened a blue-white card that gives all my flying creatures ++1. I wonder what blue-white is supposed to do.
And by and large, those have not been traps. They've really done a good job.
Some are better than others. Some of those decks don't end up working out, but that's fine. That'll happen. It just gives you such a good head start on the format if you don't know what's going on. And when you do know what's going on, it gives you plenty of options and flexibility as well. So I think we're going to see a lot of that as we go through these formats.
That's a great point.
We both had Innistrad as number one.
Yeah, but another big one though, by the way, this is huge, right? Is the early game, late game mechanics.
Yes.
Like if you look at the mechanics in a certain set, you'll be able to break them down. And the two things that I was looking for that I wanted to see are smoothing, right? Like the cycling or something that lets you, do something with your mana as a sort of a backstop. But then the main one that I just have a feeling, inside when I'm making this list that it will be in each of these is an early game, late game mechanic. Basically, think flashback, kicker, morph, any of these mechanics that let you do something in the early to mid part of the game and then do something else later. And that can be or. It can be, you can either do it now or later so that it scales with the game, or it can be you get to do it now and then you get to do something, do it again or do something similar later. And Innistrad has flashback as one of its main mechanics.
Yeah, so, and flashback, it gave decks a lot more gas while not having to sacrifice the early game. It spawned a whole archetype thanks to some uncommon build arounds like, Burning Vengeance, for example.
Exactly. A couple other things. Medium removal. This just happens to be the case. I'm not making a case. It's just in Innistrad, the removal was kind of in the middle. I like one of the standouts to me was the quirky kind of pie in the sky deck, the spider spawning deck. That's just a aspirational kind of cool thing that you get to pull off every once in a while. As far as unbeatable bombs, there wasn't a ton. There was a couple of standout rares in the set. But nothing that, ruined it.
Definitely not.
And then also I wanted to keep track of whether there was colorless mana fixing at common available. And in Innistrad, no, there wasn't. And I'm talking about good.
Yeah, they had Trial Rose Amulet, but it wasn't particularly good.
Right, like something that you want to really put in your deck, like that kind of stands out. You're right, that wasn't there. Okay, so we both had triple Innistrad. And by the way, wow. Right? Good for you, triple Innistrad. Yeah. I mean, geez, that's the 1-2 punch. What about number 2 for you?
We both have actually the same number 2, which is Khans of Tarkir, so triple Khans. And one thing, I think I have the only exception on this list, by the way, is the move from it used to be you draft, so when set A comes out, you draft 3x set A. When set B comes out, you go set A, set B. And when set C comes out, you go ABC, right? That was just how it was. But if you look at our all-time best draft formats, with the one exception, which we'll talk about, of course, we all had 3x of the same set as being the best, even in times when you would start alternating.
Yeah, it says a lot, doesn't it?
It really does. I think that it actually is another really good move that all sets now are just drafted 3x. Obviously, we might run into exceptions here and there, but for now, the plan is like when a new set comes out, you draft 3 packs of that. When the next set comes out, 3 packs of that. It makes balancing and shaping the format so much easier. From
a design standpoint.
Yeah.
Okay. So what were some of the things that stood out about Khans, just if you were to describe the format?
So Khans also is a little slower because it's more, 3 colors. Lots more tapped lands and whatnot. You ended up having all these morphs, which, like you said, gave you early and late game action. And I think that there's, part of the reason it was so enrapturing for a lot of people is there's a lot of gold cards, and gold cards are just sweet. Gold is just like such a sweet mechanic, and like one of the sets that doesn't actually hold up very well is Invasion. But Invasion, when it came out, was like a gold set, and everyone just lost their minds for it. It was so good.
Because it just had so much going on because of the gold aspect, or what?
Yeah. And also coming on the heels of Mercadian Masks, one of the worst sets of all time. But I think that Khans, just the fact that it had these, 5 clans, right? And they were 3 colors each. And you could play basically any of those was good, or just about any 2-color combination if you got enough cards for it, or 2 in a splash. And there was enough fixing. It really just kind of delivered with like overall good gameplay as well. Because that's the other thing is like all these sets just have good gameplay. That's a little harder to quantify why, but we're trying to list all the characteristics to see if we can get there.
Yeah. Particularly stand out with Khans, you mentioned it, was the fact that it was 3-color based, right? That these were kind of new ways to look at groupings of colors, because we had shards of Alara, and then these were like the whatever wedges or whatever they call them, and having these 3-color groups, let the designers kind of come up with a new world to put around them. And they did a really good job of kind of making those distinguish from each other. And actually, it's funny you mentioned it, Luis, because I had forgotten the 2-color decks. You could just draft 2-color decks in there. How in the world did they fit all of that in there? Where you could draft a viable 2-color deck with a little splash rather than having to just go full 3-color. I don't remember even how they made that work, but Yeah, but that was great. The fixing ended up being pretty good. They had those banners, or what were they called? Banners, I think.
Yeah, the banners are pretty bad. But
those weren't good though. Yeah, those were actually not the great.
But it was mostly the tri-lands and uncommon, and then the duels that actually we see in M20 now. The like Switchwater Cliffs and whatnots that come to play tap to gain a life duels at common. I mean, so there was also a 5-color deck, like straight up 5-color. I mean, one of the teams that played in that Pro Tour would just force that every time. All they do is take those lands and then just take all the good spells. And that's cool too.
That. Those tri-lands were so key. Yeah, I remember that. And you could also get away with a lot because of morphs, right? You could just play the morphs for 3 colorless. And then later on, after you kind of got your mana under you, start unmorphing them. And they had really powerful, they were uncommon. No, uncommon and uncommon morphs. Like Ponyback Brigade and those type of cards were really strong.
Each clan had one really powerful common that was all 3 colors.
Yes, that's what it was. Yeah. Okay. And then, there was colorless mana fixing, but maybe not super strong, but there was definitely, the lands, helped out a lot with that. All right. So my, third place is currently Ultimate Masters. Yeah, that one. We just had it relatively recently, the last year or so. Ultimate Masters was out, and, man, I love that set. I drafted it a ton. And when I think about Ultimate Masters, some of the sort of hallmarks are it was really complicated. There was just a ton of mechanics in there and a lot going on. It ended up, this is a knock on it, I think, in my mind, but also something to praise, which was that it valued recursion or looping some type of value multiple ways. Maybe a little too much. It ended up being heavily graveyard based, or, thing goes from your hand to the graveyard or from the battlefield to the graveyard or your graveyard back. It ended up being kind of this circle of life thing with the graveyard, depending on what deck that you cast. But I liked the fact that it rewarded you for generating value, one way or the other, through madness or any number of other, flashback and all that kind of stuff. Very diverse. Like this one stood out to me as a particularly diverse format. There was a huge range of viable archetypes. And I don't think there was any particularly good colorless mana fixing in Ultimate Masters. You were right, by the way, to mention that all of these have it, but really great playability, right? I mean, these are the top tier, but that was the part that I loved about Ultimate Masters, is that it just played out really well. What was number 3 for you?
For me, this is where we first diverged. I have Mirrodin Darksteel, and I think Triple Mirrodin was also quite good, but I actually like the addition of Darksteel. I will fully admit I have a soft spot for this format. It was the first Pro Tour I ever played, and so it was the combination of that being nostalgia, also the fact that I just practiced a ton for it, makes me like it. But what I liked about Mirrodin, in contrast to a lot of these formats, it's actually pretty fast. Like it wasn't you were dead on turn 3 or 4 or whatever, but there were some definite fast decks. There were also control decks, so there was a range, which is important. It was super synergy driven, which is something you see in a lot of our favorite formats. Yeah. And one of the things I liked is this was a paradigm shift. And I guess part of this is looking at, how innovative were these sets at the time. So part of the reason Invasion gets higher marks than it kind of should is that it was like one of the first modern gold sets. So everyone was like, wow, this is awesome. Part of the reason that I think, Innistrad gets a lot of points, besides just being an all-time great, is that it did a really good job hitting all the notes it was supposed to, and when other sets were not doing that. And so what Mirrodin did was, the theme of Mirrodin was Artifacts Matter, and you saw that in Scars of Mirrodin as well, right, if you were playing when that came out. And so Mirrodin was like, all of a sudden your main deck, 1 in a red, destroy target artifact, shatters and stuff like that. It was just completely different than any other format. So it was like, wow, this is really cool. They can just make sets that are just so different than other sets. And it led to stuff like mega powerful equipment, like Sword of Fire and Ice and Leonin Bola at common, Skull Clamp, that actually didn't ruin the format, because just most decks could have like 2 to 3 shatters if they really wanted it.
That's when equipment first came out, right?
That was the debut of equipment. Yeah.
Yeah. So a new card type in there too. That's interesting.
Yeah. So it was really cool. There was a lot of fixing, talismans and mirrors are just 2 cycles at common and uncommon. And also just the fact that you just had a lot of colorless cards in your deck meant that Yeah, you had a lot of options as to what to play. It was easy to splash stuff. Equipment does exactly what kind of you talked about earlier, gives you a lot of late game action.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, they had some busted equipment then, like Volshock Morningstar is 2 to cast, 2 to equip, +2/+2.
Yeah, it seems so simple, but when you play that out, it's like, wait a minute, this is super good.
Yeah, it was very good and just gave you a lot of punch. Any of your creatures became like an actual threat. It was also cool that some people or some decks were just be like, I'm going to play 0 artifacts in my deck because.
Oh, that's really cool. Oh, you could do that?
Yeah, you could blank like the green decks did this more often where you just had no artifacts in your deck and you just blanked all their shatters.
That's really cool.
And that was a cool strategy too. So I think Darksteel added a lot of cool cards and had enough support for the Mirrodin themes that it didn't feel like a watered down version, which is part of the problem with a lot of formats once they go to another set. Yeah. Whereas Darksteel just had good affinity cards. Like one of the most famous draft picks back then was actually by Ben S. This is back when Ben was first starting to do well. Top 8 at 2 Pro Tours that year. He took Seed of the Synod. It's an artifact land. Just taps for a blue and counts as an artifact. That's it. Mm-hmm. Over Grab the Reins, which is a threaten that also lets you sacrifice the creature to deal damage equal to its power. Like,
jeez.
Grab the Reins is known or was known as like the best or one of the best uncommons, and Ben took a common artifact land over it because he believed so strongly that affinity was the best place to be.
Wow.
And it's like, oh wow, that's pretty awesome. So like that opened up my eyes to like how much synergy mattered. Like I think I've played every single artifact that costs 1 or less in the block.
That's
and there's
insane.
A lot of bad ones.
Yeah,
because
a lot of junkers.
If you had a bunch of cards that get cheaper once you have artifacts, all of a sudden you just have a big incentive to play a bunch of artifacts. And as a result, you ended up stuffing your deck full of 1-mana artifacts that did very little. And even more than that, were fun when they did something because you don't expect them to do anything.
Right. And people are like, what does that one do again?
Yeah. Like you'd have 1 mana, 1 tap, gain a life, and it's like, wow, this card sucks. Yes, but you need a 0 mana artifact or 1 mana artifact, and when it does something, you feel very accomplished because
if you gain 5 or 6 life against some aggressive deck, it actually matters. Yeah.
So,
interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I really like the format. I think it's it might not age as well as these other formats, but it had a lot that was new that I think was really cool.
It's interesting to note, again, I think that your point about the handholds for Innistrad is really interesting when you apply this, because we just talked about Khans of Tarkir, Ultimate Masters, and Mirrodin Darksteel. None of those are particularly great for that, right? And Khans and Ultimate Masters are really not good. Like if you're a relatively new drafter, those are the deep end of the pool for sure.
Yeah.
To get thrown into. I don't know as much for Mirrodin Darksteel because I don't know if I've ever drafted that particular configuration. I've drafted Mirrodin a few times, but maybe 2 or 3 ever. Would you consider them good handholds? Or
Mirrodin does not have good handholds.
Okay, it's interesting. I wonder if the majority of the sets that we like will not have them simply because we're experienced players.
I think that part of what we look for, because look, almost every draft format is fun the first 5 times, right? The first bunch of drafts, you're just exploring. All these things are new. You don't know what's good. What we look for in all-time greats is a draft format that we can draft 50 plus times and still look forward to it. Yeah. And for that, it takes a lot of depth. And there's very few formats that have that much depth, but also are friendly to people who are just, starting out the format. And formats are getting better about that. But in general, yes, we're going to trend towards the more complicated ones. That's part of the reason I think Innistrad's the GOAT, is that it just is great for new players and experienced players.
It managed to somehow get that feature in. Yeah, that's incredible. My number 4 of all time is 3X, of course, Rise of the Eldrazi. So it's still on my list, still hanging on there. I do wonder, after hearing you talk about the Mirrodin Darksteel and mentioning the nostalgia factor, I wonder if I have a little of that going on.
Well, I actually think this is a very, very good format. So,
so maybe it's some of both.
Just that.
Yeah, I don't think it's just that, but I'll tell you what. During that time, I learned a lot as well about a lot about a lot of things. But one of the decks in there was this walls deck. It cared about creatures that had walls, and there's a card called Vent Sentinel that was a build around. And I started really pushing in different directions with that and see if I could make it work. And it turns out it was just good. Like it actually didn't only just work. It was actually just like a really viable deck. But I did that on my own. Like that was something that, I didn't read an article or hear from somebody else. I just decided to start pushing in directions a little earlier and kind of found my feet there. And then that was within the much bigger picture of what was already a very, very good format. So some of the things that stood out: slow. This one's really slow. Rise of the Eldrazi is probably it's like definitely in the, if we've got whatever 7 or 8 different formats here, it's probably in the bottom 1 or 2. This one also has an interesting dynamic, which is these huge payoffs. They called it battle cruiser magic at the time, where you would kind of either build up a thing with auras or cast an Eldrazi or level up your creature a bunch of times, because this was the set that had level up in it first. You were building up to something huge. And while that, I don't know, at face value, I could take that or leave it. It was fun. It worked. It was cool. You felt like you were doing big splashy things and trying to prevent your opponent from doing so, multiple different ways. And I like that. One of the things that stood out, and I think this is a knock on the format, to be honest, is bears. Any type of bear was bad. It was Glory Seeker was the poster child for this. It was 1 and a white for a 2/2, which at the time, was considered a perfectly playable Magic card. And it was utterly horrendous in this format. Like it was laughable. Like if somebody played a Glory Seeker against you, it was one of those, well, I can't lose now. Like what I mean is I have to quit Magic if I lose now because, somebody's playing a Glory Seeker in Rise of the Eldrazi. It was just unplayable jank. And I think this goes back to what you said, Luis, about the handholds in Innistrad, where somebody can pick up a card that looks fine and try it out, and they're probably going to be pretty happy with it. And here, if you're even if you're a decent limited player, you might go, well, I'll just take this 2/2 for 2 and kind of get a good curve going. And it's just like, no, that is not where you wanted to be in this format. And that's going to lead you astray, so the handhold's probably not as strong here. The early game, late game mechanics, once again, I love these in all of these sets. Basically, it's something that I see time and time again in sets that I really love. This one had the most on the nose one, which was level up, where you could dump usually mana into a creature, and then it would get bigger and bigger up to 3 stages. But it also just had ramp with attached to a whole bunch of air quotes normal creatures. There was these 0/1 colorless Eldrazi tokens, these little spawns, and you could sacrifice them to make a mana. And they would just sit on the battlefield until you had your big hitter in hand, and then boom, you could get them. And then I mentioned there was this Aura's Umbra deck that you could build as well to build up something big. So there was this sort of consistent early game, late game thing that you could put your mana into something later on to get something out of it. And then was there colorless fixing? Yes. In fact, it was very good. It was called Prophetic Prism. And it's 2 mana. You draw a card when it ETBs. It's Arkham's Astrolabe, just not snow, and it costs 2 instead of 1. You can pay a mana and tap it to make any color. And then I mentioned the Walls deck, which kind of stood out to me as like a really cool build around and something that was a little bit different.
So what this set does, which I think is a pretty common theme of what the sets we're talking about, again, a big paradigm shift. Like this is the first set where bears were just bad.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want that every set. I wouldn't want artifacts to be the theme every set either. Also, it breaks constructed every single time. But I do think
it has so far. Yeah.
Yeah. It's only happened in Mirrodin, Scars of Mirrodin, and Kaladesh. But I don't know. Antiquities was fine. Okay, we'll give that one a pass.
Type 1 survived Antiquities.
Yeah. But I think that the formats that really change stuff, and this is going to be harder now because these paradigms have been shifted. It becomes harder and harder to do that, right? So it's kind of funny where before you could get a lot of mileage, the first gold set, now there's been 7 gold sets, Oh, wow, the first artifact set, now there's been 4 or whatever. There is fewer opportunities to do that, which is actually fine. It just means you have to focus more on gameplay and coming up with creative themes. But look, if once we go and look at Dominaria, for example, which is on our lists, that actually didn't really have a paradigm shift of any kind. Legendary was just too mild to be that, but it was still great. So
yeah, so there's still room. What was your number 4?
So my number 4 was Dominaria, actually. And both of us,
and I'll just spoil, that was my number 5, so we'll cover them at the same time.
So both of us liked that it was, it was slow. There was no amazing aggro deck. It had some good ways to fight attrition battles, but you could also have this like battlecruiser type sort of feel as well, where you could do these attrition battles, but also assembling this just like, whether it was the snapper, the 4/5 hexproof, you could slap an aura on that, or you could play whatever one of your big legend rares, and you could try to kill them that way. You could go wide with Saprolings. It had a lot of good themes, like. Just the themes were deep enough and draftable enough that I think just about every color pair had something cool and interesting going on.
Yeah, and that was huge. It did have the early game, late game thing with Kicker. Yeah. Right. Kicker is probably the most simple version of that. So that happened. The fixing in this set was very, very good as well. And, one card that I'm almost like tempted to put this in as a must have for our the ultimate draft set is Skittering Surveyor or something similar.
Oh man, it just kept creeping up the pick orders for everyone over and over and over again. It's just a 3-mana 1/2 that searches for a basic land from your deck. And man, that was just such a good card.
Yeah. So, okay. So little aside here, but am I wrong about that? Like because one of the things that I don't like is when some part of the color pie gets infringed on, right? So green's like, hey, I've got, in this case, Grow from the Ashes, a great fixing card, right? And a reason to try to play green so that you can splash around and do that. But now the blue-white deck just gets Skittering Surveyor, right? The red-blue deck is just like, oh, I'll just take a Skittering Surveyor and splash. And it kind of infringes on green's turf a little bit, right? That's what green is supposed to be doing. Is it too easy to just print a card like Skittering Surveyor and be like, oh, it's fine, everybody can have this?
It's the sort of thing you don't want to do often, because it really does infringe on green's color pie, like you said. It reminds me of how some cubes people choose to not put signets in the cube, the 2-mana artifacts that tap for 2 different colors, because signets really make it so green isn't necessary. Like, hey, green's deal is fixing and ramp. And it's like, well, my blue-black deck can now just have 2 different signets and all of a sudden splash red and have acceleration for free.
Yeah.
So
not good. Okay. So maybe we won't put that in our must-have for Ultimate. That card seems to just glue together a lot of things and make possibilities a lot more open. Right. Yeah. And that to me is more fun specifically during the draft portion. And then I also just like cards like this that you put in your deck and you play it on turn 3 and you don't miss your 4th land drop. Right. Like that's the thing that I think is desirable, without being overpowered. So anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Again, it's not the sort of thing you should always fire off, but having a super pushed common be colorless every now and then is interesting.
Yeah.
I do think that you do pay some costs there, though.
Okay. So we'll keep it in mind. But yeah, Dominaria, the big things that you mentioned, slow and really attrition based, right? I mean, it rewards you for having this really long-term game plan and I'm talking about longer term than the cards in your hand, right? Like how many times have you played Dominaria where you made plays on the battlefield with the expectation that a card in your hand, in your deck, not in your hand, but in your deck, like Soul Salvage or Slimefoot or something like that, that's how I'm going to win the game. So I'm going to make a play now that will enable me to at some point draw this card and win the game with it. And I really like that. I like that a lot better, that long-term strategic planning rather than well, here's what I have in my hand and on the board, and here's what they have. And,
Dominaria was a visit back to Alpha, right? It's the same plane. This is our visit back to the first, Pride of Magic. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very cool that you kind of got the same feeling where in really old style limited, if they had a Serra Angel and you had a terror, you had to save your terror for their Serra Angel. Dominaria has some aspects of that.
Yeah. And that really stood out to me as a feature, right? That's something that I'd like to see in as many sets as I can, is rewarding that long-term planning. But maybe an underpinning to that is, well, then the format has to be kind of slow by definition, right? If I had the luxury to think about the soul salvage that's somewhere in my library and that's how I'm going to win the game, that means I'm not getting killed, right? There's nobody, thrashing me in the air. And it is interesting because I think back to some of I think you'd probably call them myths from sets like Dominaria, but that I'm glad that they missed. Things like what is the 3 red white 3/3 flying first striker, and it like cares about getting back stupid auras or equipment or whatever.
Yeah, I remember the card you're talking about.
Yeah, that
Tiana
gold,
or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Tiana, that card missed. Right? Like that just never really, especially when you compare her to the other gold cards, and remember, in fact, Luis, we should have put this on the list too, right? This was a big stretch is they put rare Tiana Ship's Caretaker, by the way, they put rare quality, legendary gold creatures at uncommon. That was new. Like that's something that we haven't seen.
That was definitely like, you have your Slimefoots and whatnot, and Adeliz the Cinderwind.
Yeah, totally.
These cards just seem pretty ridiculous. So that was cool. I thought legendary as a theme was actually like kind of weird. I didn't actually.
It wasn't great. It really it didn't seem to matter that much. Although maybe I just didn't draft historic decks. But
honestly, the gameplay was just so unreal good in Dominaria that it was totally fine.
Really was the best, yeah. And I have to give a shout to the sagas. I thought that they played out really well.
Oh, the sagas were awesome. The sagas were just incredible visually, gameplay wise, really just everything.
They're what Planeswalkers should be in limited, because like the rare and mythic rare Planeswalkers are just so overpowered for a normal limited game. But kind of here's your value. I know what's coming, and then it goes away is a lot more palatable. So that leaves one more because again, my 5th spot was also Dominaria. But Luis, what was your number 5?
My number 5 was Modern Horizons, and I will fully admit this is like. Maybe because I've just done tons of Modern Horizons drafts over the last, couple weeks.
I'll tell you, it was on my short list too, man. I think it's just legit. Like,
I
know you're wary
really
of being recency biased here, but like it is seriously a good set.
Yeah. And I have enjoyed playing it enough that I put it on the list, even though I think that my list changes pretty frequently just based on how I'm feeling, what I've drafted recently, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But I think the Modern Horizons, it's interesting because it is on the faster side. It's actually a bit faster than a lot of the sets we're talking about, whereas like the red-black deck, ninjas, almost any white deck could actually aggro you out pretty fast. Very synergy-driven. Again, that's something we're seeing over and over again, right? One of the things I really like about Modern Horizons that not all the synergy sets have is that there's good crossover pieces. So when you take Changeling Outcast, the 1/1 unblockable that's all creature types, well, that card is great in blue-black ninjas, but it's also good in white-black changelings or red-black goblins.
Yes.
And that goes a long way because the sets that have every piece is just in its own lane, which is like some of the modern master sets, for example. I didn't find the actual draft part to be that interesting because like once you're green-white, you just want all the cards that go to green-white and none of the cards overlap. So once you're 4 or 5 picks in, you're kind of committed. Whereas in Modern Horizons, if you start with a Changeling Outcast, which is actually the card I literally first picked at the Pro Tour, you can end up in a bunch of different places.
Yeah, there's a few. I call those pivot cards. I actually wrote an article about it for WotC. We'll probably talk about it on the show too.
Yeah, it was a great article.
Because you read it. There's Springbloom Druid is probably the best one in the format.
Yeah, Springbloom Dryad is really good for that.
Good God.
Are we doing coverage of this set in Vegas?
Yes, we are. And I also
actually wrote
Manowar.
Springbloom Druid and then erased it and put Springbloom Dryad in our show notes.
Thank you for that. Yes. And Manowar is another one. Raw power level is certainly there, but also goes so well in multiple archetypes.
I mean, Manowar I don't think is quite as good of an example because Manowar and like Mob and like Magmatic Sync are just very powerful cards.
You think they're just raw power? I mean, I think of the difference between Mob and Manowar is that Mob you just cast, right? Like the best case you can get is, well, I'm playing creatures. But Manowar, you can do that. But like I think about it in the like in the Ninjas deck, for example.
Well, sure.
Like returning it to your hand, is a real synergy with that deck that it's not when you just cast it out for raw power.
Manowar definitely looks better in the decks that can use it better, but it's also just such a good card.
Yeah.
Whereas like Changing Outcast is not a good card unless you're like making it good.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. And Springbloom Druid does fulfill pretty distinctly different roles in the different decks that it goes in, like the red-green deck.
I will admit that's also just an obscenely powerful card, so it would get over on green.
No, it's
regardless.
not. It's not though, right? I mean, it is. It's Harrow. Like it fixes
a 3-mana 1/1 that casts a good ramp spell is very good.
Okay, that's true. It is quite powerful. You would never cut
it from any green deck in history of any.
Agreed. I just think that like the fact that it puts a land in the graveyard, right, is not obscenely powerful, but it's awesome for this format.
It does some really cool things for the right decks.
The fact that snow-covered lands are basics that you can search for it,
I lost at the Mythic Championship to my opponent going, turn 2 Winding Way, naming lands, hit Hogak and 3 lands.
No.
Turn 4 Springbloom, turn 5 Springbloom plus Ransack and play Hogak. So.
Oh my God. Are you serious?
So it was just
wow, you had a day, whatever. Dude. Yeah, move on.
Yeah, so this deck, this format had complicated themes, but which is good and bad. I think that like some amount is good, too much is bad. It had good removal,
really good removal. Yeah,
premium removal at every color. Every color had a premium removal at common. Some good rares, but it really wasn't overloaded on the good rares. It actually had better uncommons than rares on average. And a lot of powerful signpost uncommons, which is, again, something that, these sets tend to have, and the more modern sets almost all have them and are great. Like, if you look at M20, right, the, Moldervine Reclamation is exactly what Green-Black wants to do and is a very powerful card. So,
Yep.
I think
does Modern Horizons have that thing? I kept going back to the early game, the mana sinks or the flexibility.
It actually doesn't have quite as much of that. It had a lot of card draw in blue, including like multiple good common card draw. One was flashback,
Rain of Revelation, and
and I guess it had like the double Raised Dead and Black, Return from Extinction. But overall, no, I don't think it was like.
No, interesting.
Remarkably good for that. So it also had snow as like a 6 color kind of. I mean, it was concentrated in blue-green, but it did feel like a very different thing where sometimes you could be drafting blue-green next to blue-green, but you're both on snow, or one of you's on snow and one of you isn't, and you want different cards. So I think Modern Horizons is quite good. I would bet that in 6 months it won't be in my top 5 draft formats, but it is right now.
Yeah, there's something about making these lists that relies on memorability, right? Like I could really have enjoyed a format, but you might come up to me and go, "Oh, it's this one from like 4.5 years ago," and I go, "Which one was that again?" I need to see some of the cards because my brain kind of offloads, sets now when I bring in a new set, just to have enough space up there for everything. Okay, so there's our list. Some common ones with Khans of Tarkir and Innistrad. In fact, both are 1 and 2s, and then Dominaria both made our lists as well. So those ones really, really impressive. And then I had Ultimate Masters instead of Modern Horizons. You had Mirrodin Darksteel, and I had Rise of the Eldrazi. So let's take a look now at what are the things, bigger picture, right? What are the things that we saw over and over from the sets that we loved, right? Some of the hallmarks, one of them right off the bat, slower format. Like none of these were what we would consider a fast format. Not the slowest though. For those listeners who drafted M14 back in the day, that represents like the slowest I was ready to use. Yeah, it's just like the craziest.
That was a format where Elixir of Immortality, which is a 1-mana artifact, you pay 2, tap it, shuffle it in your graveyard back into your library and gain 5 life. That was just a legit kill card.
That was a win condition.
You had no way to win the game. All you had was removal card, draw an Elixir, and you just sit there in Elixir over and over again. And look,
so funny.
Regardless of what you may think about our predilections, we don't even like formats that are quite that slow. Like that's just too much,
No, that's too much, right? So what we want is one where aggression isn't prioritized necessarily, rather than, the slowest possible. Another one is what I keep hammering here, some type of baseline mechanic that allows you to play stuff early on, but also leverage it later. Kicker, flashback, morph, level up, any type of mana sinks, all of that stuff.
What we're trying to not solve exactly, but we're trying to balance is mana screw versus mana flood at this core, right? Mm-hmm. You want to be able to have more games where both players play an adequate amount of spells. Mm-hmm. And these mechanics, cycling is also a really good one here. I'll let you do that, because what they do is they give you something to do early. And then because you had enough things to do early, you survive to the late game, but it also gives you something to do late. Cycling is kind of perfect for that because, imagine 5 mana, 5/5 trample with cycling 2. You pay 2 and discard it and draw a card. Like that's the kind of card that if you don't have enough lands or you don't have a 3-drop, right, on turn 2, you just cycle it. But when you do have enough lands, you just get to play it. So cycling lands do this too. These are in Modern Horizons at uncommon, and they're super powerful. They're like coming to play tapped lands that you can pay 1 mana to cycle. So coming to play tapped island, you pay 1 to cycle it. Like that prevents you from getting mana flooded or mana screwed. And some amount of that is really important to have more of the games that we like to play.
Yeah. Now there is a limit though, right?
Definitely. If you've played something like Battle Box or any sort of Magic variant where basically there's no lands and you just get as much lands as you want, like you get to choose when you want to draw land or not, that's actually, I think, not fun. I think that's too much. But I think that a little bit of smoothing goes a long way. And I'm very happy when you get to play more games where both players just get to do things.
Yep. And so that's something that I definitely look for. One thing I noted, colorless fixing at common helps, but it doesn't seem like it's a requirement. We had multiple instances here that did not have that as a main feature or even something that we really saw. So, that's a thing that, matters to a point, but I don't think it's like a huge deal. Yeah. I mean, again, that's the sort of thing where I think it's unpleasant if every set, the common, there's a colorless common that's better than all the colored commons. Cause, by the end of Dominaria, I think we were all taking Skittering Surveyor over any colored common, right? Eviscerate, Blessed Light, like Sheev and Fire, anything. That I think is not great because I think that you want people to take colored cards over colorless cards. But I think having decent colorless fixers can be good. Okay. It also comes to fixing, just in general, the right balance of fixing is good. I think a set that would have ranked much higher is Shards of Alara. All the sets in that block, they just didn't have good fixing. So no, they didn't. It was just, it's like Shards and Cons are very similar structurally. 5 3-color pairs with their own themes and some overlaps into 2-color decks. The reason Cons just trounces Shards is Shards are just too light on fixing. And that meant that pushed a really hard 3-color, situation. Yeah. Where you'd end up in a spot where you just, the cards were so powerful that you did want to play them. You had to keep up with your opponent. But the person who drew, Island, Plain, Swamp to cast all their Esper cards versus the Naya player who's stuck on Mountain, Forest, doesn't have a Plains, that just wasn't very cool. Like that's where those games came from that we're talking about, where players didn't get to play very many spells. Yeah. So what about removal? I didn't actually see a specific trend with removal. I wouldn't have been surprised if we would have noted that the removal in these sets was all really good or really slow or really what. It didn't actually seem to matter a ton. I suppose it's just relative to the format. I mean, it depends on what basically you want a good level of interaction. So one of the main complaints about Innistrad is Invisible Stalker. It's 1 in a blue, 1/1, unblockable, hexproof, right? And, I think that if you removed Invisible Stalker, the format would be more enjoyable. Yeah, right? And of course, the real key was that Butcher's Cleaver. Yes, that was the combo. But basically, if the format doesn't have a bunch of must-kill threats, it can be a little lower on removal, and that's fine. If the format has tons of really powerful rares, or at uncommon or common things that just have to be removed, or too many evasive creatures, then you end up in a spot where you need to have a good amount of removal, or it just doesn't work. Like, I think Dominaria worked partially because there was just great removal in all the colors, and that let you kill these rare quality uncommons, right? Right. So, okay. I think that removal doesn't have to. It's not removal and fixing are both, I think, somewhat similar. Where I don't think that a certain level is necessary for a format to be great, but I do think that you need it to be proportional to the threats you're dealing with or the spells you're expected to cast. You don't need much fixing in a 2-color format. In a 3-color format, you do. You don't need much removal in a format full of interactable cards. In a format full of cards that are hard to interact with or very powerful at low rarities,
yeah, you're more likely to need removal there.
Right. That makes sense. So yeah. So more relative to what's going on. Another hallmark that we see are diversity of archetypes, right?
Oh yeah.
And that's just a lot. That's kind of probably one of the most bread and butter things that you'd want to see. It's just a lot of different draftable decks. Basically, you talked about some of the formats, specifically some of the Modern Masters formats that we've had, where it feels like it's a little bit too on rails, where after the first like 3 picks, it's the only question is which uncommons or rares that I get lucky to get and how many of the commons that I get, but I kind of know what my deck's going to look like. And that sucks. That you're kind of on cruise control through the rest of the draft, just hoping to open good stuff, but without any really poignant decision points. I think that whatever our ultimate draft format is, it won't have that feature. It'll be one where you can draft a whole lot of different decks.
Yeah. And one, to kind of build on that too, the more different archetypes there are, especially niche or hidden ones, the better we tend to like it. Like spider spawning, right? Spider spawning, I think essentially counts as a hidden archetype because it wasn't drafted in the first couple of weeks, really at all.
No, totally a hidden archetype. Yeah.
If you give Innistrad to a bunch of people who haven't drafted a ton or maybe haven't read a bunch of articles about draft, they might not discover it for quite some time or ever. And that's totally fine. It does not decrease their enjoyment of it, No. I think that formats that have 5 decks get boring really fast, right? Formats that have like 7 or 8 tend to last a lot longer. Formats that have 10 are, that's really hard, but it's awesome.
Yeah. And then a sub point on that as well are sometimes
we're already at a sub point though. So this is like a sub point.
This is a sub on the main point. So this is like B is when there's an archetype, say a 2-color archetype, but there's a slightly different way to draft it that cares about different cards than the main version of the archetype. I really like that. I find that really interesting where you're like, oh, I'm the red-white slivers deck. And it's like, okay, cool. But then there's this other build that pops up, maybe not as often, right? That's like a red-white build around deck or a red-white controlling deck or something that's a different, a little bit of a curveball that lets you really work hard and discover these things and understand them when they pop up.
Yeah, like if the red-blue theme in Modern Horizons is generally like these cards that say if you've drawn 2 cards this turn, get a bonus.
Yeah.
But you could also be blue-red ninjas. And that was a cool twist where it changed your pick orders. See, that's the key. You don't want your pick orders to just always be static. And
that's it, isn't it? Yeah, that's a huge one for us.
It's so awesome when sometimes you'll 4th pick a card and sometimes you will never want to take it. Or sometimes you'll take card A over card B. But, it's very easy to imagine taking card B over card A or card C over both of them despite it being a worse card because there is
of what you have.
Synergy and a lot of different archetypes. And I think that's what keeps it fresh and spicy because, look, if you could make a pick order algorithm and then just basically look at that list and just pick based on that, that's just not very fun.
That's not going to have longevity.
Yeah. Pick 1, pack 1. That's fine. Because pick 1, pack 1, I think you actually can make a pretty much objective list. Not objective, but pick 1, pack 1. You can make a list and always follow that exact list because literally it's pick 1, pack 1. But once you're 4 or 5 picks in, those lists should be drastically reduced in utility. And some formats, it would not have changed the order. It's you'll take the 3 mana, you'll take murder every single time, and then you'll take card X, and you'll take card Y because there's no synergy, so it's just straight based on power level. It's power level and curve. And yeah, sometimes you'll take a 2-drop over a 5-drop because you're curve, but you're almost always going to take the higher power level card.
Yeah.
Whereas, once you're in a synergy format, that just all goes out the window because the cards just change so much.
Yeah. One of the other ones that you just touched on are build arounds, right? And I wouldn't put this in the must-have category, but boy, is it nice to have a sweet build around. Just one uncommon build around that works. It's so hard though it seems like it's really difficult to design one that fits right.
Well, here's why build arounds are so awesome. What you're touching on here is a build around can be a 1-card archetype that if it has the right support, and they are hard to make and they are hard to identify right. But if you can nail it where this card doesn't take up much space and what it asks of you is gives you a whole new archetype, that can be really cool because
it's such a huge upside. Yeah. I mean, for a set,
it's the sort of thing where it doesn't take much for mill to be somewhat viable. In fact, actually a great example is Sam Black just posted about this stream of consciousness, like 5-color control mill weird deck, right? In Modern Horizons. It's the sort of thing where it doesn't take very many cards for mill to just be a deck. And once you're there, it's like super neat that you just basically got additional design space, additional draft space, additional gameplay at a pretty low cost.
For that one extra card. Yeah.
Right.
That could have been something boring or filler or not as good.
Might have influenced a couple other commons or uncommons in the set. But what I'm not talking about like putting a card that says like, you know, whenever you play an artifact, make a 2/2, because then it's like, wow, I need to put a lot more artifacts in my set. But it's like a card that says like, you know, whenever you play a creature with two or less power, draw a card, or actually even better, 1 or less power, draw a card. Because then it's like, oh, I want to play all these 1/1s I wouldn't normally play.
That don't get picked and that you can wheel. And it's just so much more interesting, right? To have that in there. Clear the Mind is another deck, card that comes to mind that kind of spawned its whole own thing that is just, didn't look. I mean, that's a fun story, right? We first started drafting that set and we didn't really care about that card. And by the end of it, we cared about that card a lot. Like it actually mattered. And that's such a sweet one. And again, it is tricky for them to nail those, but when they do, those make stories, right? The other thing that I think about is, you know, we talk about the psychographics for Magic, you know, different types of Magic players who like to do big things or show off or find combos or whatever. Is it that space, you know, isn't fully explored for a lot of those psychographics. Like the people that like to do combos or find super clever things are often at a bit of a loss and limited to do so. And when those do pop up, you make that group of people happy as well, or that part of your brain. I think most people are combinations of some of these are psychographics anyway. So that's cool. Bombs. None of the ones that we listed are what we would call like a king format. So that's probably safe to say that our ultimate draft format is not, going to be that. But I don't know. They don't have to be pauper just to be good. Some of them touch up against Prince pretty decently here, and they seem totally acceptable, I guess, with the caveat that the removal can keep up, or the format does, or whatever. I don't want to auto lose to a card. Non-interactive bombs are really a place that like take up a big chunk of enjoyment. But if they're really powerful but they're killable, I don't know. Seems fine.
Yeah, I think that there's a balance here. Like, I think it's good to have some mega bombs. You want some spikes of excitement when you open your pack, Like, I actually think it's kind of unfortunate when you're in a spot where you open your pack and you just don't even, like, the rares are just not exciting because the rares aren't good in the set. But you also don't want a Fate Reforged or, other set, like even War of the Spark felt a little like this, where it's just like, the bombs just completely dominate. And we changed our tune a little in War of the Spark, but it did feel that way initially. So I think that, bombs, again, it's all about levels and ratios, even though it does turn out that most of the sets we picked here did not have a bunch of ridiculous bombs. Yeah.
So I think ideally we would, not be super, super high on bombs. Okay. So those are the sort of big hitters.
Yeah.
So let's make our best. Let's make a run at what is our list of requirements, right? Let's put ourselves in a game design studio or something, and we're saying, all right, here's what we need from you, team, and we want to make the best draft format ever, and here's how we want it to be structured. So let's make that structure here, and see what we come up with.
So I think for the speed of the format, and look, here's something to think about when we're talking about all this. It's good to have variation between sets, right? While, look, original Zendikar is not making our all-time list because, when you make a scale of speed of Magic sets, triple Zendikar is a 10. It is the most fast. Yes. It's the fastest set we've ever seen.
Yes, it goes from M14 to triple Zendikar.
Right, that's the scale. And I don't want sets to be like that. That said, something had to be the fastest. I don't think it's necessarily bad for a triple Zendikar to be, a set that exists. So when we're saying, hey, well, let's build our ideal draft set, we're not saying every single draft set should be like this, because that would also not really be, the most satisfying experience overall. Totally. That said, I think that the set trends to be on the slower side. If 1 is the slowest and 10 is the fastest, I'd say most of the sets we like fall in the 3 to 5 range or so. And I think, like some of them, like Modern Horizons and Mirrodin, are like closer to 7s or 8s. I like those sets. Rise of the Eldrazi is closer to like a 2. You like that set, But I think that in general, they're slightly more on the slow side than the fast side. I think it's important that aggression can win, but I also think that it's important that you don't just lose if you miss your 2-drop, or you don't have to have 5 2-drops in your deck.
Yeah, and it's okay to have an aggressive deck in the format, right? That can keep things in check a little bit. Yeah, even a few. It's just, you don't necessarily want that to be one of the fundamental hallmarks of the set. It's just, yeah, it's okay to, look, we don't need to. There's always this give and take, right? Like, it's fun to do big things that are slow and take forever. But if that's what everybody's doing, or if that's what you get to do literally every time you play it with no tension, it's less fun, right? It just becomes sort of the norm where you're like, well, here's my 8 mana spell, or here's my 10-drop or whatever. And that, kind of takes away the fun and the tension of it. If there is a deck out there that can keep you in check, that's a good thing, because then when you get to do the special thing, it feels more special.
I mean, I think it's good to make it so people have to be a little honest, right? If you're in an arms race where people are like, well, I'm just going to play more 7s and 8s, and so it's like, okay, well, someone needs to play 2-drops to make it so you get punished for this.
Yes, exactly.
But
yes. Now, and then the one that I've hammered on here is the do stuff early, do stuff late, right?
Yeah.
I want stuff to do that affects the game early and then gives me more decision points later, whether they're mana sinks or the mechanics we talked about, or even smoothing things like cycling. Just take care of me in the first 3 turns and after turn 6, right? Like, give me something to do in those times with the same card, ideally, and I'll be happy.
Yeah, I think that's a really important key, and that's something that every single format we have has something in on that range.
Yeah. Now, one other thing that is a result of that in many ways, and maybe this is personal to us, but I want the format to reward long-term planning and strategy. Is that necessary? Like, is that just the thing that I want, or is that something that we want in this ultimate draft?
I think that's good, but that has to almost more to do with the speed of the format than it does.
Okay, so that's just a byproduct of me wanting a slow format.
Yeah, a format where you can make plans that are. You want a format that's slow and has a lot of interaction, because I think
I guess the way that I see it is like, if you combine a relatively slow format with the stuff to do early, stuff to do late style cards, then you're making decisions, right? Do I want to save up my mana and do a bigger thing like a kicker cost? Or do I want to cast it early so that I don't die, right? This decision point is one that's interesting to me and that I really value having access to, versus a really slow format that's like, put this 8 mana card in your deck because when you cast it, you get to win the game, but it doesn't do anything. There's not a lot of strategy to that, right? It's like you're trying to get to the point of casting it, and then you do cast it, and then that's it. So I don't know. There's some weird wiggle room in there where I want the format to let me make a decision on whether to do something now or later, and have that be different,
I think that the next one is diversity of viable archetypes, colors, and part in kind of bundled into this is synergy also. Like,
yes.
Basically, we want a format where there's a lot of different archetypes, and those archetypes have different ways to draft them such that your pick orders change. Also, ideally with good overlap between them, so that when you're 4 picks in, you're not locked in any way, that you can swap to what's open and not get completely punished for that. I think that some formats...
And this might be the most important one.
Yeah.
Right? Diversity of viable archetypes or colors
one that I think
or whatever.
Overall keeps me... Well... Good gameplay overall keeps you there the longest, but
you're right. It does.
That's just really hard to quantify. We're taking a stab at it, right? We're saying like, hey, these are all the things you can do to point you that direction. But yes, basically, there's a format with like 10 different decks, and like all of them are viable. Maybe like 3 are better than the next 3, which are better than the next 3, which is way better than the last one. That's good. That's like M20 feels that way too. I wish white was better. I think that would be the biggest change they could make. But like, in general, there's a lot of different things where if I first pick a card, I don't feel like there's some formats where you first pick a white card and you're just like, well, I'm going to be white, blue, or white, black, or I'm not going to be white, because those are the only 2 good white decks. And that is a lot less interesting, So I think that having a lot of different archetypes and having good synergy archetypes, good build arounds, all that is not, they're not all, I guess the build arounds aren't mandatory, but I think they really, really help with diversity of archetypes.
Yeah, I have those in our next section, which we should move to, which is that. So those were the must-haves. Oh, and one other I wanted to put on the must-haves, I think, is 3 of the same set. Like, I want to know what is coming. I mean, technically,
I don't
it doesn't
think that's
matter.
a must-have, because I think that, I mean, you can find examples, and we might see 2 and 1 later as they change things up every now and then. I wouldn't say that's a must-have.
Okay. We won't put it in the must-haves, but it is something that is very much on my radar as I keep going back to those sets. The ones that aren't like that almost never break in for me, right? So there's something to that. I don't know what it is exactly, but I like, I mean, it could just be the simple fact that, like, in order for them to build cool archetypes, you need to be able to get multiples of cards, right? And if you only have one pack to get it, you can't. And now if there's something that's comparable, or that, that they put into another set that you're also drafting within it, that is that helps the archetype in a similar way, then that's fine too. So yeah, not a must-have, but something that I often look to. The would be nice to haves for it are, you mentioned it just now, the build-arounds, right? Like some particularly uncommon build-arounds that aren't maybe obvious at first, or if they are, work really well within the constraints of the mechanics of the set so that they don't take up a whole lot of space on their own. That's really nice to have. I don't think that defines a set, but boy, that is a really big golden star, to put on a set, as if they have that. And similar to that are hidden archetypes. We talked about the spider spawning deck, for example. Those are similar, but being able to discover something about a format later than right away is really great, man. It just, it gets people talking. Have you seen this deck? No way. You can't actually draft that. Yes, you can if you get this, because then you can wheel these other cards. And it's like fascinating to think that you could sit down and take a shot at it. Also, it's just super fun to try. Like, it's risky. You're taking way more risk than you probably should at the draft table, but it is so fun to just put yourself out there and try to draft some crazy storm deck or whatever that doesn't come together that often. But when it does, it's amazing. And then another one that I think I don't have it in the must-haves, but definitely in the would be nice to haves is just good fixing, right? You have to support these sets, right? Like we've talked about multiple gold card base sets here, and all the ones that made our list had really good fixing for it, where there were sets that we really liked that could have but didn't have fixing. So good mana fixing seems like a really nice addition. Mainly, I like the lands. I like using the common land slot for duels or something like that. That seems to have really kind of upped my happiness in a lot of these sets at all.
Yeah.
Any other nice to haves that come to mind for you?
No, I mean, I think, like, as Thanos says, balanced as everything should be. Like, I think.
Okay.
We're going to eliminate half the draft formats now.
Yeah.
I think good fixing is important, but you don't want to go overboard. I think when everyone can play whatever they want, that's too much. But I think being able to, basically, I think the cycle of 10 common comes and play taps for 2 color lands is pretty good. I wouldn't mind seeing that just about every set.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I just find those a really good use of a pick and a sweet thing. Now, what are some of the things that our ultimate set doesn't have?
I think no blistering fast speed, because look, I tend to like things that aren't the slowest but are on the slow side. But I still think the slowest is better than the fastest, because when the fastest, it compresses the decision making to 5 turns and fewer decisions. Like, it's not a decision that you didn't draw a two drop, and you will lose when you don't draw a 2-drop most of the time in sets like Zendikar. In Zendikar, if you didn't have a 1-drop, sometimes you felt like you were losing. And it's just absurd. 1 mana 2/2s all over the place, and 1 mana 2/3s just step links. Like, these games just lasted 4 turns, and there wasn't a whole lot of gameplay there. So blistering fast speed, definitely bad. If it has no build-arounds, I would be highly suspicious that the drafting experience will be fun enough.
Right. Same.
You don't need 20 million different archetypes, but you do need some cards that change your pick orders. Otherwise, again, you're just drafting on power level. Which kind of leads into the next one, which is low quantity of archetypes. Like, again, that's just something that will just make it be too boring overall.
If a set has that, then we're out.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's just a deal breaker.
Yeah. And then not bomb heavy. What's that?
Well, just, we don't want it to have, I should have said bomb heavy. We just don't want it, like, that's generally not an attractive quality.
Yeah, it's okay. So you don't want it to be super heavy on bombs. I agree with that. That, again,
right. Yeah.
I think that what this can be boiled down to is during the draft, we want a lot of different decisions to make, both in terms of which direction we're going and which cards, how they interact with each other. And during the games, we want a lot of different decisions to make. So all these really just point to that. Bombs tend to make the decisions less interesting, and so therefore you'll have fewer of them,
Yep. That's what it is. I think I think you've really struck the nerve, by the way, on the overall thing that we actually are striving for. We're kind of, we're breaking it down piece by piece, but when you really look at it, we want decision points. We want a lot of them. We want them to matter, and we want diversity. We want it to be different. We want different things to happen often. And that's, that can be difficult to jam into a limited format. But when it all comes together, that's just beautiful, right? That's just that harmony that you get into these top 5 formats. And by the way, we should mention, if you have a chance to draft any of the ones that we mentioned, do it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, definitely jump in and do it.
I will say that waiting for them to be flashback drafts on Magic Online is a good strategy because I don't know if you know, Marshall, but like packs of Innistrad are like $20 each or something. Like
what?
Yeah. Like,
are they really
something like that? Yeah. No. I don't know what cons are at right now, but like a lot of these packs, or some of them at least, are quite expensive.
Well, I might change my jump in and do it then. Yeah, you might want to use that money for something else if it's going to cost you $100 to do one of these drafts. But yeah, maybe on Magic Online you can do it. That was fun, Luis.
Yeah, that was cool.
That was a cool way to look at at some of our favorite stuff and go a few levels deeper. I want to say thanks again to Kayla for the support and also for the idea and working with me to kind of flesh this show out. Her support and everybody else on the Patreon is always really appreciated. And it's always cool to find yet another way to connect with our listeners. And this was just, a deeper way to do so. So thanks, Kayla. And thank you to everybody on the Patreon. We're about done here, Luis. You want to call this thing a show?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've now given ourselves both a desire to draft some of these formats.
Yes, man. You know what? The one that stands out to me, it's cons. I want to draft cons so really bad.
My brother actually, like, him and his friends just drafted a box of cons recently. It's just so sweet.
Oh God. Was he sending you pictures of the deck or what?
He didn't do that, but he told me about what happened and stuff. So he
remember the what was the blue-green build around uncommon? The enchantment? Yeah.
And then Hidden Trail
Secret
or whatever.
Plans.
Trail of Mysteries.
Yeah. Want it. Yeah, Trail of Mystery. Oh, man. Anyway. All right, let's call it a show. That's going to do it for this one. First things first. Remember, GP Vegas. That's gpvegas.com or cfbevents.com. Boy, you got to be there. Luis and I are going to be there. Seriously, everybody in Magic is going to be there. Huge amount of everything. You artists are going to be there. Side events from all types, content creators from all reaches of Magic. Cosplayers will be there. Everybody, there's something for everybody at Magic Fest Vegas. And we certainly hope to see you there. Make sure you check it out. Get all booked up. I booked my hotel not that long ago, and it wasn't even that expensive. You have a lot of options in Vegas. Vegas isn't a particularly huge city either, so you don't have to stay at the event site if you don't want. But you can, and there's always a whole bunch going on in the hotel lobby, people playing games and all that kind of stuff. So we hope to see you there. Again, if you see us, come say hi. We love saying hi to our listeners. You can find us on social media. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And we'll be back. We'll be back next week with more. We'll see you then.
So I feel a little weird post Barcelona because I don't know if for folks who don't really follow like the Magic Pro scene, it's going through quite a bit of upheaval. Currently, the Mythic Championship in Richmond is the last slated Mythic Championship. We don't know what's going to happen next year. And I think that it's likely things look fairly different. We don't know what that means yet. And that it makes a lot of us, and by us, I mean, I guess people who are pro Magic players or former pro Magic players or involved in the pro scene, regardless of to what level, feel like this is the end of an era. And that's not necessarily the case. Look, this isn't me saying like, hey, doom and gloom, it's all done. This is terrible. But it's more like, we don't really know what's coming next and we think it's going to be different. And, change can be frightening sometimes. It's also pretty clear that like a lot of the focus is going to be on the MPL, which I think is awesome. Like the fact that playing pro Magic is now an actual career, I think is pretty sweet. Mm-hmm. Like I don't have any complaints about that. Like, yes, it would be nice if, I was in the MPL. I think a lot of people who aren't feel that way, but that doesn't mean I think it's bad. I actually think it's quite good. I'm glad it's there, even if I'm not involved. But what it does mean is we don't know what it's going to look like for people who aren't in the MPL. If what their system's going to be, are they going to be included? And that's kind of rough. There's just this community of people who kind of feel a little, uneasy, lost, whatever you want to call it, about what's going to happen in the future. And it kind of feels like Richmond's the last Pro Tour, even though I know they're called Mythic Championships now, And I think that, obviously when announcements, if they do happen, when they do happen, are going to give us a lot of clarity there. That's going to be great. I just know that like the mood in Barcelona when talking to folks, especially folks who aren't in the MPL, is like, it's a lot of like, I guess we'll wait and see, but like, I'm glad I'm qualified for the last Pro Tour,
Yeah. Just uncertainty, right? This is like a real cloud of uncertainty.
It's possible that whatever comes next is going to be awesome and we're going to be super happy with it. I think that it's just a little hard to wrap your head around that when you don't know what's going to happen. And Magic's just a huge part of all of our lives. Again, not as like, it's been a long time, Marshall, since I was a professional Magic player that depended on like doing well in tournaments to pay my rent, that sort of thing. That doesn't mean that I don't have a huge soft spot for it and care a lot about it. And I do. Right. So being at the precipice of like, we don't know what's going to happen next. And there's a lot of people who are kind of waiting with bated breath. It's just kind of a weird mood. So.
Yeah, it is. I've definitely got that vibe. By the way.
I'm sure you did when talking to other people who it's like,
yeah, for sure.
I mean, we just want to know what happens next and we want to, we hope there's a place there for us.